rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for joining me for Tuesday's edition of End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries, and I'm going to be talking about a subject that is very close to my heart today, and it's a subject of gun control here in America and around the world even, but especially here in America. Obviously, we live here just north of Dallas, Texas, and most of my friends here in Dallas and around the area have weapons and carry pistols. It's a very common thing here in Texas to carry a pistol, and now we can actually open carry. But there are people in and around the world, globalists, that would love to take that right away, take away your right to even have a weapon. Why would they want to take away your right to have a weapon? Well, if you have no means of resistance, I can tell you whatever I want you to do, and you pretty much have to do it. There's no means of resistance. So that's the goal. Well, there's globalists that are trying to set up a one-world government that would try to enforce that disarmament of the citizens of the world. And so we're watching moves towards that all the time. Anybody who advocates to control gun control is on a global level. They are globalists. They're internationalists. They're looking to establish a one-world government because they don't want you to have a means of resistance. And if you look throughout history, I may get into some of the history today towards the end of the program, but if you look throughout history, when they've implemented gun control on a nation, there was a reason for that. They had an ulterior motive, and they wanted to control the people, and they didn't want them to have a way to resist. So they took their weapons away, and then you're pretty much at the mercy of whoever wants to control you, especially if they have all the weapons. So what are we talking about? Well, in Revelation chapter 13, it prophesies that a one-world government will be established just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. Currently, the United Nations is the only entity on earth that is designed to be a one-world governing body. Well, the globalists of the United Nations are presently, in many ways, working day and night to establish this world governing body, not just in gun control, but in many ways. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, those things encompass consumption and production. That's what the goal is of every human being on earth. They want to control everything you do. Also, social justice goals to redistribute the wealth. I mean, it's just on and on things they're trying to do to establish this one world governing body. And eventually they want to give it teeth so they can say, do this and you have to do it or else. We're not quite there yet, but we're definitely getting there. But one of the major platforms, and this is something that it's an absolute must for them in order for them to be able to realize their world governing dream, is disarmament. If you've ever been out in front of the United Nations, the huge statue out in front is a pistol that has a knotted barrel. And so that's because disarmament is one of the main platforms of the United Nations. They understand that you have to disarm the people to be able to control them with no means of resistance. That's where a lot of this is headed. And it's not just nuclear weapons, but everything all the way down to small arms, pistols and rifles and shotguns for every individual. Why? Because to realize the ultimate goal of absolute control with no means of resistance. That's it. No means of resistance. And so today on the program, let's discuss the United Nations' ongoing efforts of global disarmament. We're not talking about nuclear weapons. I'm talking about the pistols that your grandpa gave you, the pistols that you own, the rifles, all the different things. They would love to take all of that from American citizens. The United Nations would. You say, well, hold on a minute, Dave. I thought the United Nations was this great humanitarian organization that wanted to just go in and help people when they had a disaster or something like that, or they're going to feed the poor. That's not what the United Nations was designed to do. The United Nations was designed from its inception to be a one world government, a socialistic one world government. And they want to disarm you, and they want to control you. That is the goal. Now, they can say whatever they want, but we've done the research. We've got it documented, for years. And now they're really not even trying to hide it. And so, consequently, that's what we're going to talk about today, global gun control. Well, I read an article recently from the New American. Global gun control advocates, they met in New York City to set the UN disarmament agenda. So they're meeting to talk. Hey, we want to disarm the population. We're going to meet, talk about it. We're going to put things in place. And over the next several years, we're going to try to implement this. What they're trying to do is establish this one world governing body of the end time. The Bible says it's coming. We can see it coming. But the United States doesn't necessarily have to participate. And and the United States not participating in the one world government, that's a conversation for another day. What I want to talk to you about today is the disarmament, the plans that are being put in place by the United Nations. And then we'll talk about the United States a little bit. So, as a result, this article states, anti-gun globalists, they met in New York City on June 6th through the 10th to discuss ways to confiscate small arms and ammunition from civilians and to consolidate monopoly control over those weapons in the hands of governments of the United Nations and the member states of that. So the convention is part of a UN-controlled process of disarmament called the Program of Action. If you want to look it up, go to the United Nations, look up the Program of Action. It talks about small arms and everything. Well, delegates from around the world attended the 6th biennial meeting of the states of the Program of Action, or the POA, and this latest planning meeting gave delegates an opportunity to move the ball closer to the goal of ridding the world's civilian population of the small arms, pistols and different things, and ammunition that could challenge the ability of the UN-approved governments to carry out the will of the world body. This article highlights a few of the provisions that represent the most clear and present danger to our liberties here in the United States. First, the plan calls for the UN's member states to eliminate the threat of technology. Now, they're wanting to, this is everything, any kind of gun. So listen to this. I'm going to go real slow here because I want you to really get this. The plan calls for the UN member states, which we are, to eliminate the threat of technologically advanced weapons, including polymer guns, Glocks and things like that, and those firearms, and 3D printed guns. So they're getting very technical. Doesn't necessarily have to be something you'd buy off the shelf, even 3D printed guns, as well as the tracking of materials used in the craft production of small arms and light weapons. So, they're getting very, very detailed. They want to track everything. Specifically, the chair's summary calls for the strengthening 3D printing regulations in the context of 3D weapon printing. So they're getting very detailed. That you've heard of these guns where they could print them 3D and then fabricate a gun. Well, they're wanting to even restrict that. And you say, why? Well, for ensuring, and they also want to ensuring export licenses that are in place for the 3D printers. So other people who would like to export 3D printers to do it maybe overseas or something like that, they're wanting to regulate that as well. They're wanting to have to issue export licenses for 3D printers that might be used to print one of these 3D guns. And this is for drawing global attention to the need to pay attention for the resale of such printers and for strengthening controls over 3D printing technology. So they're wanting to control every aspect of the production and the purchasing of guns, period. Any kind of a gun. Well, of course, no one is shocked, of course, that the globalists at the UN want to draw up comprehensive plans to take our guns, any and every variety of gun, out of the hands of civilians. Now, listen to this next line item very, very closely. Paragraph 33 of the chair's summary of the meeting calls for urgent tracking of civilian-owned firearms, recommending that the manufacturers be forced by the UN to install RFID and biometric technologies in limiting the access to the weapon to authorized users only. So if you purchase the gun, they want to connect you with that gun only, with authorized users defined as obviously state actors or UN member nations. So that's right. As part of the program of action, what we're talking about, the foundation upon which the Arms Trade Treaty is built, a treaty nearly half of the U.S. Senate supports, the United States has committed to passing legislation that will require domestic firearms and ammunition manufacturers to equip their products with RFID chips and biometric technologies that will help the government slowly but surely disarm civilians. And that's not all. At the end of that paragraph, the UN suggests that governments look into combining the RFID chips, biometrics, and GPS tracking technologies to be sure to prevent regular people from getting their hands on guns. Additionally, according to the text of the chair's summary, that will serve as the to-do list for the world's international cadre of gun confiscators, the POA will serve as an international instrument to enable states to identify and trace in a timely and reliable manner the small arms and light weapons that are the subject of the scheme. So, in practice, this means that the governments of the member nations, including the United States, will soon create a massive, all-inclusive database of all parties that manufacture, own, sell, trade, or transfer arms and ammunition. They're wanting to control every aspect of it. Who creates it, all the way down to who goes out on the gun range and uses it. So think about this. If recent history is a reliable indicator of how such data would be used, after the catalog is complete, Congress could pass a law, or the President could actually issue an executive order compelling voluntary surrender of privately owned weapons, ammo, parts, and components, including reloading equipment. Like I said, every aspect. Some people reload their own shells. Well, they're talking about every aspect of it. And if after a statutory set window, citizens don't turn in those items to their local law enforcement, then officers will be sent to remind violators of their responsibility under the law to disarm. You say, well, man, that sounds like George Orwell, 1984. This is what they met in June to talk about, folks. You can go read it on the UN's website. Look it up, what I'm telling you. Ask me for my notes. Email me, drobbins@endtime.com. I'll send you my notes. You can look all this stuff. It's right there in black and white. So you say, well, how will this worldwide tracking of weapons, ammo, and component parts be carried out? Remember, it's even the component parts, any kind of ammunition, reloading equipment, everything, the plastic that goes into the printers that do the 3D printing. I mean, every aspect of it. Well, paragraph 32 of the chair's summary lays out the plan for real-time tracking of the firearms and ammunition from manufacturer to storage, and from storage up to the individual users, you and I, who would go to the gun range on a Saturday afternoon. Well, once the governments of the member nations begin tracking and confiscating weapons from civilians, the POA, the Program of Action, in paragraphs 30 and 31, mandates that member governments take direct control over transfers of the small arms and light weapons. This control will require the federal government to begin stockpiling these items and making a database of the recently impounded guns, bullets, the 3D printers, the plastics that go in the printers, polymers that make like Glock weapons and different things. And I like Glock, so I keep referring to Glock. Sorry about that if you're a Sig Sauer or a Smith Wesson guy. And all of the component parts. This database must include the marking, record keeping, and tracing of weapons, and in this regard considered barcodes, radio frequency identification or RFID, and the biometrics for purposes of electronically identifying stored items, collecting data on them, and enabling the data to be entered automatically into record-keeping systems. So it is evident from a reading of this latest UN disarmament publication that despite the rhetoric related to the promotion of a culture of peace, in other words, whenever you hear an Orlando or a San Bernardino or a Sandy Hook, the president gets up and says, we need more gun control. So despite the rhetoric related to the promotion of a culture of peace, there are only two reasons that the UN is making every effort to disarm the population of the United States and other countries, and that's but of the United States is what obviously most of us are interested in, is to weaken our sovereignty, number one. We've protected that sovereignty for the last 240 years with weapons. Most of the people in the United States are armed, and so as a result, they can't just come right into your neighborhood and take over because they know there's going to be ramifications for that. But imagine if they were to disarm the citizens of the United States. They could just pretty much tell you to do whatever they want you to do, don't care who you vote for, don't care about any of that. You do this or else. And so that's where they're headed. And so the two reasons that they would want to do this to the United States, to weaken our sovereignty, and then number two is to take from our people, obviously, the ability to resist those dictators, really at home and abroad, who would want to place us under the boot of tyranny. It's very, very important that we understand really what's going on with the United Nations and even with the current administration that is saying, hey, we had this shooting in Orlando, and because of that, we need stronger gun control laws in America. What? Gun control laws? If you made everybody turn in their guns, only law-abiding citizens, some of them, would do that. But do you think all of the criminals and all of these gang members and all that stuff, do you think they would turn in their guns? No. So a mass gun confiscation law, that's not going to work. That will never work. Because there's only one reason, really, why they would want to take away all of our guns. Why? Absolute control with no means of resistance. That's the goal. It's documented. Look throughout history when there's been these big, huge gun confiscation and really, really, really strict gun control laws. Germany, China, I mean, you name it, the USSR way back. Look throughout history, Uganda, all these different, Rwanda, all these different places. There were mass killings. And I'll get into that if I have time at the end of the program. So you say, wow, I mean, a lot of us didn't even know that this meeting happened in New York in June. But if you think all this stuff's going away, my friends, please listen to me. It's not going away. One of the major platforms, remember the gun outside of the United Nations, the gun with the tied barrel. They're letting us know right up front, one of their major platforms is disarmament. Not just nuclear weapons, but it goes all the way down to the small arms. And I've just read where they want to get down to they want to regulate the plastic that goes into these 3D printers to where you could use that to possibly print a 3D gun. I mean, they want to regulate everything. So let's talk about, now that you know the goal, let's talk about the history of the United States, because we resisted this. In 240 years of this country, we have resisted this. We came out from under King George, and because King George had taken their weapons, we came out from under that and said, no more. It's not going to happen. So let's talk about the United States history, and then global governance and what they're trying to do. So jump back with me 240, 50, 60 years ago. Then I'll bring you up to today. After years of slavery, our forefathers defected from England, obviously with the dreams of a land that would be governed by the people, not a tyrannical king. They had just come out from under King George. They didn't want that. They wanted to be governed by the people. So in an effort to guarantee more freedom and less control, they signed the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution starts off, "We the people." So the country was to be ran by the people, not a governmental overlord that would tell us what to do. And no, that's not what it was all about. And basically the Constitution of the United States, it limited governmental control of the people. So to further restrict any ability to establish a strong central government, the U.S. House of Representatives devoted the first 10 amendments, or the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution to the protection of individual liberties. Of these, the Second Amendment gives every United States citizen the right to keep and bear arms, not with the intent of providing weapons for you to hunt rabbits or different things, or to go out and shoot clay pigeons. That's not what it was about. But as a means of defense against a tyrannical government that might seek to enslave individuals and to strip them of their God-given right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the Second Amendment was all about. Remember, they had just came out from under King George that had taken their weapons. So the Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Period. Now, some say that this is not an individual right, but merely it gives each state government the power to maintain their own military force or a militia. The reason for the debate is simple. All men are endowed by their Creator, not government, with certain unalienable rights. One of those rights is the ability to keep and protect their freedom. Consequently, any government or dictator, remember that statement, any government or dictator seeking to strip the United States citizens of those freedoms and to control the people must intentionally misinterpret the Second Amendment and take away the citizens' ability to resist, hence gun control laws. So isn't it clear why our forefathers signed the Second Amendment into law? They knew exactly what it was like to live in slavery under a dictator who disarmed the masses and left no means for resistance. The critical question today then is this: if the only reason for disarmament is to control the masses, then why is there presently such a push for gun control in the United States and around the world? It's obvious. Absolute control with no means of resistance. For over 1,000 years, it had been customary for an Englishman to serve in a citizen's army or militia, which originally required every individual to be armed and to defend the realm if needed. Well, this system of universal armament was successful for two reasons. Number one, each citizen had a way to defend himself and to protect individual liberties. And number two, the monarchical rule, the governmental rule, was kept in check by sheer physical force should a tyrannical government try to enslave the population. Now, during the Stuart period in 1603 to 1714 AD, there was a civil war at that point between the kings and the parliaments, which resulted in each side vying for control of the militia. Consequently, this led to the disarmament of many English citizens because both sought to confiscate the arms of the opposing faction. So in the end, Parliament forces prevailed and the citizen soldiers of the England were turned into the new model army in 1645. However, Parliament misjudged the loyalty of the army to the people of England. And this, coupled with no parliament paycheck and an attack on their religious freedoms, led to the Rump Parliament, where the army actually took over the government under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell. However, Cromwell died in 1659 and the Parliament was reinstated by General George Monk in 1660. Well, this new Parliament, which was made up of those that favored the monarchy, placed Charles II on the throne. Charles disbanded the army except for those that were loyal to the crown. Immediately, Charles began to disarm any person who was judged dangerous to his empire. Well, this left the standing armies in the power of the king to protect his kingdom, and without the system of universal armament, everybody having a gun, it ended the ability of English citizens to defend their individual liberties, and it forced them to stay in slavery. So, I'm coming up to a break here, and I want to just go over, make sure you're getting what I'm talking about. The United Nations and many United Nations member countries met in New York in June. And they're discussing documents that would eventually, they're putting huge controls, more and more control, with the ulterior motive of disarming individuals all the way down to small arms and different things. They're wanting to regulate. When they start to regulate, the eventual goal is to disarm. That's what we're talking about. Here in the United States, we've resisted that for years, and now you know why. And when we get back from the break, I'll talk about the original intent of the Second Amendment. And if you're just watching us the first 30 minutes or listening to us on the radio, go to endtime.com to listen to the rest of the program. I'll get into a lot more about what's going on with the United Nations and their efforts to disarm the citizens of not only the United States, but the entire world.
When current events are found in Bible prophecy, it's astonishing. At Endtime Ministries, we are seeing them unfold every day, and so can you. We've put together a current events in Bible prophecy package for anyone who wants to understand like never before. Irvin Baxter and his dedicated staff have spent hundreds of hours of research and study, and in doing so have discovered that current events in Bible prophecy are telling the same story. These 13 DVDs will prepare you to be ready in this extraordinary time that God has destined you to live. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and save over 20% when you buy the current events in Bible prophecy package.
Matthew 7 says, "Straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." In a world where our culture is spiritually underdeveloped, do you want to be one of the few who travel the road of spiritual maturity? If so, I recommend Endtime University. This 6-semester course will guide you through understanding the Bible, keys to spiritual growth, life and teachings of Jesus Christ, and Satan defeated, sonship restored. Watch the lessons at your own pace and enhance your study with the accompanying workbooks. This includes outlines for each lesson and quizzes to test your comprehension. Endtime University will help you walk the straight and narrow path to spiritual maturity. For more details, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. 1-800-ENDTIME.
If your station does not carry the full hour of End of the Age, go to endtime.com to hear the conclusion of today's broadcast.
Well, welcome back, everybody. What we're talking about today is the United Nations' ongoing efforts to disarm the citizens of the world. Look at the huge statue of the pistol with the knotted barrel outside the United Nations. It's one of their huge platforms that they run on, disarmament. And it's not only nuclear weapons. It goes all the way down to the small arms and right down to where they want to regulate ammunition and everything. They're wanting to track everything with the eventual goal of total disarmament, except for of course, the NATO forces and the global governing army. Because imagine if there was a one world governing army and all the citizens of the world were disarmed, there would be absolute control with no means of resistance. Think about that. Well, that's what they're trying to do. Globalists, internationalists that are behind the United Nations, that is the goal. Now, they're going real slow because they know that if they just go in and said, give us your guns, I mean, we're talking about civil war in the United States now. Today, I know, especially here in Texas, but I know a lot of people in the United States, they're not going to stand for that. That's just not going to happen. However, that's the goal, and that's what these guys are pushing for. And so let me continue on with the program because I'm showing you how I went over the history of the United States and why we actually have our Constitution and the Second Amendment, which is designed for us to be able to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government or a dictator that would try to usurp authority over us in that way. That's what the Second Amendment is for. Now, they've tried to misinterpret it and say, no, it's just for you to be able to hunt and go out and shoot clay pigeons and this, that, and the other. No. That's a very, very small part of it. The main point is for us to be able to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government. So, let's talk about the original intent. After defecting from England because of the tyrannical rule of King George, our forefathers sought to build a new country that was governed by the people. Now, these were educated men, and they knew that over time there would be those that would try to usurp authority over free American citizens. In order to declare our freedom from oppression and provide a safeguard against a tyrannical government ever enforcing its will upon free people, the original founders wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. These documents clearly define the mindset of our forefathers in the late 18th century. Well, the opening statements of the Declaration of Independence, they provide a distinct remedy for the infectious disease of a tyrannical government, which would seek to deprive free men of their God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration states that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, from the people, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. And it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their security. So, in an effort to further restrict governmental encroachment upon the people, the Constitution of the United States was signed into law in 1787, and it remains the supreme law of the land today. In essence, it tells the government what it can and cannot do. In order to avoid a dictatorship or tyranny, the original framers built a system of checks and balances into the government by dividing it into three parts: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, which of course is supposed to limit the ability of any one particular entity from retaining all the power. Well, regardless of which state each framer was representing, one main determination propelled each and every one of them: no dictatorship shall ever run the United States of America. That was the goal behind the Constitution. It limited what government could do. It told them what they could do and what they couldn't do, because they did not want a dictatorship to run the United States, ever. Well, after the Constitution was adopted, several state representatives determined that the wording of the Constitution was just a little vague concerning individual liberties. As a result, James Madison wrote the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights. These 10 amendments are a very specific list of restrictions placed on the federal government further protecting the individual rights of each United States citizen, and it cannot be usurped under any circumstance. Well, in forging these documents, history tells us that even though our founding fathers did not always see eye to eye with each other, there were two things that all of them agreed on. A central government or dictator should never be allowed to usurp authority over the people of the United States. And number two, universal armament. Remember, originally, universal armament as English citizens, they brought that here. Universal armament is the only check against a tyrannical government. Well, of course, consequently, the first point is addressed in the Constitution, while protection for the latter is clearly stated in the Second Amendment. Let's talk about the Second Amendment real quick. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the secure and free state, to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In other words, it's their lawful right to keep and bear arms, pistols, rifles, shotguns. Of the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment is the most debated today. Think about it. Think about the presidential election today. One individual is pro-gun, one individual is anti-gun. Think about it. It's one of the most debated issues of the Bill of Rights today. Now, some have said that it gives the state the right to control any militia and that only those individuals should be armed. Others say, because of the Game Act law passed by the English in 1671, which restricted hunting to those of wealth, that the Second Amendment only allows citizens a weapon capable of hunting. But this is simply not the case. As you can see, the original framers of the Constitution knew that there needed to be a specific provision to arm the people. Why? Well, the answer is clearly found throughout the documents that were used to forge our very nation. Armed United States citizens have the right to protect their individual liberties, to protect their property against any government or dictatorship that would try to strip them of either. Not only were arms to be used as a defense against a tyrannical government, but our forefathers also believed that it was the duty of every American citizen to throw off any such government or dictator and to provide new leadership for the future of this nation. That is the reason for the Second Amendment. Without the universal armament of the population, this would not be possible. So for this cause, our forefathers pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Second Amendment, thus protecting the right of every individual United States citizen to keep and bear arms. They understood that there was only one reason why any government or dictator would seek to disarm the population. Again, absolute control with no means of resistance. So, what does the United Nations really hope to gain from, let's say, an international arms treaty? Well, it's simple. Control, control, control. This meeting that they had in June in New York City to monitor and to track the selling and buying and where everything goes, all the arms all the way down to the end user, and to talking about adding RFID chips and different things to guns. I mean, all of that is simply about control. It's not about a safer society. I tell you, let's just think about it logically. Take America's guns away. My wife and I were out walking here a while back, and our sidewalk comes kind of down into our neighborhood, and I told my wife, I said, think about it if all of the guns were confiscated out of our neighborhood today. If they came in and took all of our guns, what do you think all these thugs and gangs and all these different people are going to do? They could walk right in and do whatever they wanted to. The reason law and order is the way it is here in the United States is because most people are armed. Let's just face it. Now, I understand that there's a God and He protects us. I got that. Believe me, I'm all about that. But for the majority of Americans, they're also armed. And bad people know that. And they realize if you come in my house, there's going to be ramifications for that. So it kind of, there's a checks and balances in our world. But for those that have the guns taken away, these gun-free zones, criminals can go in and just do whatever they want to because it's absolute control with no means of resistance. Well, the United Nations having these meetings with member nations saying, hey, we need to control all the guns with the future goal of removing the guns, confiscating them. Why are they wanting to do that? It's control, control, control. So as an institution of global governance, since its inception, the United Nations founding members have dreamed of a globalized world where all nations would operate under the rule of international law. The only way for that to happen would be for them to universally disarm the planet, which would allow them strategically position their fully armed UN peacekeeping forces around the world to, quote unquote, keep the peace. So with this in mind, the United Nations Charter, which, if you don't know this, the original United Nations Charter in 1945, it was drafted by Alger Hiss, who was a convicted communist spy. And of course, it was the United Nations Charter was signed in 1945. And it gives the UN Security Council the responsibility of, with the help of a military staff committee, the regulation and possible disarmament of the world's weapons. And you realize it was signed in 1945. It was penned by Alger Hiss, a convicted communist spy. Not one word of the United Nations has changed from 1945 till today. So the same charter that they function under is the exact same one that was penned by Alger Hiss in 1945. And so you wonder, why are they trying to disarm the citizens? Absolute control with no means of resistance. So the United Nations doesn't have a Second Amendment because it's diametrically opposed to the idea of arming citizens. Why? Like I said before, absolute control with no means of resistance. Now, when we get back from the break, we'll talk about the Bible and its prophesying a one world government that they're trying to establish right now.
For centuries, ministers have been preaching the coming of the Lord. Although they tried, they weren't able to understand the prophecies leading up to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Today, we are able to understand because the book of Daniel says the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Hi, I'm Judy Baxter. Irvin began studying Bible prophecy at a time when end-time prophecy was aligning with current events like never before. We have traveled around the world sharing the prophecies of the Bible. Now, 30 years later, almost anyone can get the end-time message via television, webcast, radio, magazine, and conferences. John 4:9 tells us to work while it is day, for the night comes when no man can work. Thank you, End Time family. You have enabled us to work while it is day to reach the world. Only eternity will reveal what will be accomplished together. God bless you all.
Okay, everybody, let's see if we can wrap this up today. And we're talking about, obviously, the Bible's prophesied one world government, but we're talking about further moves by one of the main platforms of the United Nations, which is currently set up to be a one world governing body. One of their major platforms is disarmament, not just nuclear weapons, but all the way down to small arms of individuals. And they're trying to control everybody. That's the goal with no means of resistance. They're trying to set up this one world governing body. Well, The Bible prophesies just such a world government. According to Scripture, there's going to be a world government established on earth just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's going to control the world politically, religiously, and economically. This global government will eventually be ruled by one man, a personage referred to in Scripture as the Antichrist. Revelation 13 describes this coming New World Order. In verses 1 through 8, it describes the one world government. Revelation 13, 11 through 15 describes the global religious system. And then verses 16 through 18 obviously describe the world economic system, commonly referred to as the mark of the beast. Each of these globalized governing entities is going to be used to force every citizen on earth to pledge allegiance to the world government, its ruler, the Antichrist. Well, just like the United Nations platform today, the Antichrist will come into power with a plan for the universal disarmament of the planet. And it's already going to be well in place before he takes control. And it's going to be all in the name of peace. Well, let me ask you a question. Was peace the reason the world empires of Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome conquered their adversaries and turned them into slaves? No, it was all about control. Was peace, let's ask this. Maybe peace is what Adolf Hitler was thinking when he disarmed the Jews and led them to the gas chambers. Was it peace? No, it was all about control. Perhaps it was peace that motivated Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin to kill millions. Absolutely not. It was not about peace. It was about control. So is it possible that peace was behind the disarmament of England, which led to the slavery of our forefathers? No. Control. And there's only one reason in history for the universal disarmament of citizens. What the United Nations is trying to do right now. Why disarm citizens? Absolute control with no means of resistance. Now, think about it like this. Another article I ran across. Obama actually advocates for the UN gun treaty ratification. So this comes from the Daily Signal. The Obama administration upped its commitment to get the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty ratified, which of course is a tall order since a bipartisan coalition of 50 senators have already said that they oppose the gun treaty that Secretary of State John Kerry signed 3 years ago. Well, on August 22nd, about 30 days ago, the second conference of state parties to the Arms Trade Treaty was held in Geneva. According to the State Department, the U.S. representative to the conference, William Malzahn, said the U.S. wanted to ratify the treaty that establishes export and import controls for combat vehicles, aircraft, and small arms and light weapons, but was already currently complying with that. So the United States has been complying with this and moving in this direction for the last 3 years. And we're complying, and the article actually states the United States remains committed to the Arms Trade Treaty, which we signed in September of 2013. We're still working on the package to transmit the treaty to the U.S. So they're still looking at ways to implement it more here in the United States. The Senate, for its advice and consent to ratification, is what they're looking into. It is not clear when we will complete this, but we are actively working on it. So they're actively working on this right now here in the United States. As we pursue ratification, let me assure everyone that the United States is already fully compliant with the requirements of the Arms Trade Treaty, as the U.S. national control system exceeds those requirements. Currently, 79 countries have ratified the treaty dealing with arms exports and imports, but diplomats from 109 countries participating in the gathering stated the fact. The treaty states that each state party shall establish and maintain a national control system, including a national control list, in order to implement the provisions of this treaty. It goes on to say each state party is encouraged to include in those records the quantity, value, the model, and the type, authorized international transfer papers of conventional arms covered under the Article 2, and the conventional arms actually transferred, the details of exporting the states, and importing the importing states, and transit and transshipment states, and also the end users as appropriate. So they're wanting to control every single aspect of this. They're not wanting any leaf unturned. Well, do you realize, now looking at further implementation of this here in the United States, Governor Jerry Brown from California just signed a bulk of sweeping gun control packages into law, but he also vetoed 5 bills. Let's talk about it. In July, we're September now, just a month and a half ago, Governor Jerry Brown signed 6 gun control bills into law. You look at this is slowly being implemented here in the United States. So these included a requirement that ammunition purchasers undergo background checks. Now think about that. You go in there to buy a box of shells and you got to go through a background check? It doesn't even make sense. It's all about control, folks. Absolute control with no means of resistance. The governor of California vetoed 5 other measures, including an expansion of the use of restraining orders to take guns from people deemed to be dangerous. He stated, "My goal in signing these bills is to enhance public safety by tightening our existing laws in a responsible and focused manner while protecting the rights of law-abiding gun owners." Well, okay, so Brown approved the bills that would ban the sale of systematic rifles equipped with bullet buttons, allowing the ammunition magazines to be easily detached and replaced. Why do they care about that? It gets to the point where you got to scratch your head and go, come on, this is crazy. Well, the vetoes that he signed included a bill that would have allowed coworkers, mental health coworkers, and school officials to petition the court for a gun violence restraining order for people judged a danger to themselves and others. Such orders would allow guns to be confiscated for 1 year. So in vetoing the bill, Brown wrote that he had agreed last year to approve a law allowing family members and law enforcement to petition the courts for restraining orders. The law took effect in January 1 of this year, so at this point it would be premature to enact a further expansion, said the governor. Well, the governor's actions came one day after the legislature approved 12 gun control bills that were introduced in response to the December mass shooting in San Bernardino that killed 14 people. The bills gained legislative momentum after the massacre in Orlando that claimed 49 people's lives. The National Rifle Association Institute for Legislative Action accused the governor of exploiting the terrorist attacks for political gain. A governor wouldn't do that, come on, especially Jerry Brown. Well, Governor Jerry Brown, it states, signed a draconian gun control package, exploited a terrorist attack to push these measures through, even though the state's already restrictive laws did nothing to stop the attack on San Bernardino. So the bills that the governor signed will do this. Now get this. They're going to require an ID and a background check to purchase ammunition, so you got to get a background check to purchase ammunition, and to create a new state database of ammunition owners. You don't even have to own a gun. They want a new state database just if you own ammunition. And then the laws also ban possession of ammunition magazines that hold more than 10 bullets. So they don't even look at the fact that you might have 2 guns there that have 5 bullet magazines. It's all about control. Control. It just kind of gets sticky. You just feel like, man, I feel like I'm living in China. The law would also restrict the loaning of guns without background checks to close family members. Now think about that. Me and my son, let's say when he was younger, I took him hunting all the time. And if I was in California under this law, they would want my son, 10-year-old Brock, to have a background check before I could loan him my gun on a hunting trip under these laws. Now think about how crazy this gets, folks. Say, well, why in the world would somebody want to do that? It's absolute control with no means of resistance. Now, bills that the governor vetoed, they would have put an initiative on the November ballot to clarify that theft of a firearm is grand theft and is punishable as a felony. It required those who make guns at home, well, like with these 3D printers, to register them with the state and get a serial number so that the weapons can be tracked. He vetoed these. Required stolen or lost guns to be reported within 5 days, limited Californians to purchase of one rifle or a shotgun per month. He actually vetoed that, which I'm happy about that because that's crazy. Well, Brown acted on the gun bills just before he left for the European vacation, expected to last a few weeks. So think about it. Let's look back over history and what history teaches us about gun confiscations. It's very important. In 1911, Turkey established gun control, and from 1915 to 1917, 1.5 million Armenians, unable to defend themselves against their ethnic cleansing government, they were arrested and exterminated. In 1929, the former Soviet Union established gun control as a means of controlling the more difficult of the citizens. And from 1929 to the death of Stalin, 40 million Soviets were met in an untimely end at the hand of various governmental agencies as they were arrested and exterminated. After the rise of the Nazis, Germany established their version of gun control in 1938, and from 39 to 45, 13 million Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, the mentally ill, and others who were unable to defend themselves against the brown shirts were arrested and exterminated. Well, interestingly, the brown shirts were eventually targeted for extermination themselves following their blind acts of allegiance to Hitler. Any American military and police would be wise to grasp the historical significance of the brown shirts' fate. Of course, after Communist China established gun control in 1935, an estimated 50 million political dissidents, unable to defend themselves against their fascist leaders, were arrested and exterminated. Closer to home, Guatemala established gun control in 1964, and from 64 to 1981, 100,000 Mayans were unable to defend themselves against their ruthless dictatorship, and they were arrested and exterminated. The list goes on and on, folks. In the 20th century, it's estimated that about 70 million people were killed by their governments, not in war. And there were more people killed by their governments in the 20th century than there were in the conventional wars. Think about that. Do your research. So we're talking about arms confiscation, gun control. What's it all about? Why is the United Nations pushing? They're establishing a world government and they want absolute control with no means of resistance.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.